Hello and welcome back to the Chargers Check-In. My name is Cecilia. I am here to preview arguably the most important game of the season for the Chargers. Look, if the Chargers or the Jaguars don't win, both of their playoff opportunities are going to fall off of a cliff. Obviously, the Chargers are still in the division race. I know it doesn't look super promising, but as long as they have a chance to win the division, that's what we're pushing for. So obviously another huge game coming up between the Chiefs and the Broncos this weekend. We'll have to keep an eye on that. But for now, let's take a look at the injury reports of both teams, and then let's get into how the Chargers can beat the Jags on all sides of the ball. So looking at the injury report, starting on the Chargers side, there's not a whole lot that's notable here. The main takeaway is that Oronde Gadsden, who we were told is going to be day-to-day with a bruised quad, had a full practice. Right, that's the best news that we can possibly get. I assumed that we would see, didn't practice or limited practice, but the fact that he had a full practice tells me he is most likely going to play, and I think that's a pretty big factor this weekend because we'll get into some of the Jaguars' issues. One of their issues is going to be how do they balance coverage against a really strong receiving group. Other than that, obviously you have Deion Henley, Quentin Johnston, Ladd McConkey, all limited because of a variety of injuries. We haven't heard too much about that, so I'm assuming that they are all going to play. And then you have some veterans resting on a Wednesday practice, as they always do. So keep an eye on these injury reports, especially Oronde Gadsden. We want to keep that at full, and notably Bobby Hart is on his way back. I'm not going to assume that he's going to play. We'll get into the offensive line in a little bit. But if he does play, that's really good news for the Chargers. Now, onto the Jaguars side, almost everyone on their offensive line is on the injury report, but they all have limited, not didn't practice. So they're most likely all going to play, but it's something we can keep an eye on. It's possible that one of them is out just because of the, likelihood when you have that many. But the person I want to direct your attention to is Jordan Lewis and Greg Newsome, too, to be fair. They both are on the injury report. Jordan Lewis didn't practice. Now, for context, Travis Hunter is out for the season. And, to me, he's their most athletic cornerback. He's the one that I would think you put on Ladd McConkey because he's the only one who's going to have a real chance in one-on-one situations. And we saw Ladd absolutely cook the Steelers defense last week. So that's going to be something that they're very aware of and something I would say I would probably put Jordan Lewis on Ladd. So if Jordan Lewis is out, who are you looking at there? And, regardless of who they put there, even if Greg Newsome is able to play, and I think he will be since he's listed as limited, I think Ladd is going to have a big advantage in that matchup. So let's get into the matchup. We got to talk about the state of the Jaguars. So they're 5-4, second in the AFC South. They're behind the Colts. The Jags aren't in the best situation right now. They're coming off of a tough loss to the David Mills-led Texans, despite leading 20-3 in the second quarter. I'm sure some of you watched that game. That was an insane comeback. And, when you think about the Jags and the Chargers history that they have and how the Chargers let the Jags have that comeback, you might be thinking, this is kind of a great opportunity for the Chargers to take advantage of some momentum that they have and the lack of momentum that the Jaguars have. And I think that's real. Now, they did have a punt return for a touchdown. The special teams recovered a fumble. They wouldn't have been in the game without that. And to me, that's a little bit worrying because the Chargers have struggled to cover punt returns. And that's something that, we've talked about it a lot. It has to get better because that's the kind of mistake that allows worse teams to beat better teams. And I'm going to be upfront. I think that the Chargers are a better team than the Jags at this point in the season. The Texans defense did keep them in it. They had a great interception. The real problem, though, was that the offense on the Jag side couldn't convert on third down. And as you guys know, the Chargers, they're one of the best third down defenses in the league. So that is going to be a great opportunity. We'll get into how the Chargers can leverage that. But they, you do have to give the Jags offense some credit. They put up a lot of points against what the Chargers know is a tough defensive front. Really, the problem with the Jags is that they're an inconsistent team. They can't reliably win in the trenches on either side of the ball. They lost to the Bengals and the Texans. They also beat the Chiefs and the 49ers, and that was before the 49ers had a million injuries. So they have the talent, right? We know that they have the talent. I would argue that the discipline isn't there. They have the most penalties in the league. They average 9.2 per game. And, I've talked about the Chargers having a similar problem. The Chargers are still only at 7.2 per game, and that's a big difference in terms of yardage. If there are any Jags fans, out there watching this, I'm curious what your guys' perspective on this, because when I watch the tape, especially on the defensive side, I see a team where the effort is a little bit lacking. What do you guys think? I'm curious if you guys have the same takeaway, because I'm looking at it from the outside. They're averaging 22.8 points per game, and they're allowing 24 points per game, despite having a winning record. So they're very inconsistent. We don't know which Jags team is going to show up. When they're at their best, they're a tough team to beat. It's hard to get them to show up at their best on all sides of the ball. So let's talk about how the Chargers can beat their offense. Obviously, it's led by Trevor Lawrence. He doesn't really look right this year. I want the ball in his hands as much as possible, and that means the Chargers need to stop the run early. I think he's been making a lot of mistakes. I think his accuracy has gone down a lot. I think he's a little bit hesitant in his decision-making. Jags are led by Liam Cohen. He likes to use a mix of zone and gap schemes in the run game, a lot of motion. He tries to get as much chaos into the pre-snap as possible to challenge defenses and to, get a read for what Trevor Lawrence is looking at. I think this is going to be another communication test for the secondary. And the fortunate thing is that's something that's looked a lot better in recent weeks. We've seen Derwin James put a lot more effort into that. Elijah Molden now looks full health, and RJ Mickens is coming along. So I do have confidence in that aspect of their game. And all of the Chargers cornerbacks look pretty good. None of them are elite. None of them are amazing, but they all look solid. And overall, that's a pretty good room. So I feel good about that. But back to stopping the run. Travis Etienne is their running back. He's averaging 4.9 yards per carry and 72 yards per game. To me, that means he's probably a little bit underutilized by them, but when he gets going, he has that quality of being great through contact. He has great contact balance. He's hard to bring down, and we need to see the Chargers be able to tackle well in this game. Again, that's something the Chargers have been a little better at lately. I asked you guys who stood out to you guys on the defensive side last week. A lot of you said Denzel Perryman. And I think this is another game for Denzel Perryman, another game for Deshaun Hand, where if we can see them step up in the run, that's going to make the entire defense better. Travis Etienne, he's had some explosive plays. He's also a solid receiver. Again, as a receiver, he's hard to tackle because he can, on a swing pass or whatever it is, he can get some momentum going, and that contact balance is going to be a challenge for this defense. He leads his team in yards after the catch. We're going to need another physical performance from the defensive line, and I have confidence that they can do that. Jamari Caldwell, he had a good game. Deshaun Hand is back, like I said. I think we feel the difference. I think that they can get this done. Obviously, Khalil Mack, always a factor in the run game. I'd like to see Thule continue to do well in the run game. I think that they have a good opportunity to shut down the run early, especially, like I said, their third down conversion rate isn't great. It's 36%, pretty bad. So stopping those early down runs could shut down drives early by putting them in situations where they have to get a lot of yards to get to third and short, because otherwise they're playing into the Chargers' strengths. And they know that. I think the Chargers need to pay attention to Trevor Lawrence. They like to draw up runs for him. Not a whole lot, because obviously it's not really his forte, but they like the QB draw, and that is something that can exploit the Chargers' weakness at defending QB scrambles. I would not be surprised if they do that a couple times, especially in the second half, where, the Chargers just aren't the best at. And that's not something we've seen change a lot. They haven't had a lot of opportunities in recent weeks. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers doesn't exactly challenge a defense in that particular way. But I think the best thing that the Chargers can do schematically is put resources toward pressuring Trevor Lawrence, especially on second downs. Like I said, stopping the run on first down, getting after the quarterback on second down. That's what's going to set up those third and longs. That's your best interception opportunity. That's your best opportunity to get good field position. That's the chance to say, okay, Trevor Lawrence, now you have to put it in a guy's hand down the field. And that's not going to be easy to do. We'll get into the receiving core in a second, but Trevor Lawrence has been making a lot of passes that are too high, and that leaves balls like in the range to be tipped, to be intercepted. That just leaves them in the range for chaos, and I think that's something that the Chargers defense thrives in. As you can tell, I'm buying into this defense. I think the defensive performance is repeatable. I don't always think that the way that the offense wins is repeatable, because the offensive line is such a big question mark every week. But I don't see this defense as having any big glaring weaknesses. And so I think how they played last week, they can do it again. Trevor Lawrence doesn't necessarily make super bad throws under pressure, but there are a lot of ways to be bad under pressure, which is why those statistics that are like, this guy's really good under pressure, this guy's really bad, they're not really as valuable as watching the film. For Trevor Lawrence, his throws will be fine, but he has a really hard time escaping a collapsing pocket. You could see that against the Seahawks. They were able to take advantage of that. And this offensive line, if any one of those somewhat injured players don't play, this is probably a bottom 5 offensive line in the league. This is a big opportunity for the Chargers defensive front. We've seen Odafe Owe play well. Tuli looks like one of the better overall edge defenders in the league, counting the run defense, of course. I think this could be a big opportunity for them. I would love to see Justin Aboigbe continue to develop. But moving on to their receiving core, top receiver, obviously Brian Thomas Jr. Parker Washington, who had a great game last week. De'Ami Brown. Like I said, Travis Hunter is out. They did just add Jacoby Myers from the Raiders. He looks good last week. I think he's going to be the one to prioritize in coverage. He got the most yards last week, so which I think is interesting and is honestly probably not a good sign about their receiving core in general. Parker Washington is their kickoff returner as well, and his name was on the injury report. It is too early to know if he's going to be out, but if he's out, honestly, I think that's a bigger impact on special teams than anything else, especially with the Chargers' particular weakness in return coverage. This unit they're good overall. They do have to deal with high throws from Trevor Lawrence, like I said. Notably, they have some of the highest average depth of targets in the league as an overall unit, and I think that plays into the strength of the Chargers defense. They like to run that too high shell. They like to put a lid on it and not let explosive plays happen. And with that average depth of target being a little bit deeper, I think that gives RJ Mickens, Elijah Molden some real opportunities here. So when it comes to beating their offense, I think the Chargers have an advantage. Their defense is going to have to continue to show up. We need to, see what we have on the offensive side, see what we have in Trevor Penning. But let's get into that. Let's see, how can the Chargers beat the Jaguars defense? Now, the cornerback, Jordan Lewis, like I mentioned in the injury report, he's having a good year. He's on pace to have his career high in pass breakups. It'll be interesting to see if he does play, who do they put him against? I think the answer kind of has to be Ladd after last week, but we've seen, QJ could pop off, Oronde Gadsden could pop off, Keenan Allen could pop off, any of these receivers can, and so, you put him against Ladd, what are you doing with Oronde Gadsden? What are you doing with QJ? So there's a lot of ways to draw this up, but if Jordan Lewis is out, he's got that neck injury right now. I think Ladd and QJ are both going to be problems and are both going to be hard to defend. This is a defense that's significantly more vulnerable to pass plays than they are to rushing plays. At least the way I see it, they really struggle to get after the quarterback. So hopefully Herbert can have a break from all of the pressure. Obviously they do have some names. Josh Hines-Allen is the one that's going to stand out there. But if Herbert can go into the bye week healthy, that would be so huge for this team. Herbert's time to throw is insanely short right now, but last week he was still pressured in 42.5% of dropbacks. That is a wildly poor performance from the offensive line because of how fast Justin Herbert is throwing the ball. There's barely any time to get to Herbert, and they still are almost half of the time. As much as, I don't think the Jags defensive line is amazing, they are probably looking at this as a big opportunity to get right, which is never what you want to see. So I'm hoping that we can see Trevor Penning out there. From what I gather, he's going to be playing on the left side, left tackle, which is interesting because Austin Deculus, as much as he's struggled in the pass game, he had a few really good run blocks last week. He opened up a lane for Kamani Vidal to get a touchdown. He was the lead blocker ahead of, I believe it was Kamani Vidal again. He didn't look too bad in the run game. So I'm curious if we can see Trevor Penning out there, what that looks like. I don't think we're trending towards seeing Bobby Hart this week, but that's something to look out for too. I'm curious where that leaves Austin Deculus. Does he just stay on the backup there at left tackle? I don't know. Like I said, Josh Hines-Allen that's the name you're going to need to know. He needs to be chipped. He needs to be doubled. Put Tucker Fisk out there, have Oronde Gadsden continue to chip. And, I think it was interesting that Jim Harbaugh said that last week, Will Dissly was a healthy scratch. He sees Oronde Gadsden as a clear tight end 1, which is awesome for a later round pick. And he sees Tucker Fisk as tight end 2. That's your number 1 pass catcher and your number 1 blocker in the tight end room. So I'm curious to see if Will Dissly will be active in this game. Also on the defensive line, Eric Armstead, he's not a huge threat in the passing game, but I think he's a great run stopper. And, I've talked about how the Chargers need to use Kamani Vidal, especially early in the game, especially early downs. I don't want to see him run toward Eric Armstead's side. I don't think there's a need for that, especially in the first quarter before they can really get the passing game going. So I'm curious how they handle that. That's probably the only aspect of Greg Roman that's frustrating me right now, because otherwise I think Greg Roman is calling a great game. I think he's been great at doing what he can to protect Herbert. The quick game looks good. The run game looks good. Kamani Vidal, he's developing. So Greg Roman's going to be aware that the Jags have one of the worst opponent third down conversion rates in the league. That could allow the Chargers to take more chances downfield early, look for big plays on second down, especially past midfield. I think, once the Chargers get into a decent scoring position, they can kind of look at this as 4-down opportunities because the Chargers are likely to convert on third down. They're also going to be likely to convert on fourth down. And like I talked about last week, the Chargers' power surge play is looking good. It's looking really good. So if you can just get in that short yardage, that would be a big opportunity. That's how I think the Chargers can beat the Jags on both sides of the ball. Some general notes about this matchup. Their kick coverage hasn't been great lately on the Jags side. I would like to see Darius Davis improve before the end of the year. I know he's generally considered one of the better returners in the league, but we've seen some up and down performances from him. I think this is a good opportunity if we could just get a couple blocks going to get some good field position. Now, the Jaguars are a borderline playoff team. They're not one of the best in the league. They're not one of the best in the AFC, but when they show up on both sides of the ball, they are a tough team to beat. Make no mistake, in the preseason, there's a reason that they were predicted to make the playoffs and, be in contention for winning their division. I think if people understood how good the Colts were going to be, that wouldn't necessarily have been the case, but the Chargers have to win this game. The stakes are very high. I know to some people it felt like, they have to win the Steelers game, but statistically, the Chargers' odds of making the playoffs, they kind of fall off a cliff if they lose to the Jags. That doesn't mean it would be impossible. And for the Jags, they would be looking at something in the 20-ish% range if they lose to the Chargers. So both teams are going to come in very motivated, very hot. I expect this to be a tough physical context. Like I said, I think that what the Chargers defense is doing is sustainable. I think they can keep doing it. Derwin James looks better as a leader. Elijah Molden looks like he's flying to the ball. Same with RJ Mickens. Man, what a success story, RJ Mickens. The fact that he's overtaking Tony Jefferson for that role is huge, and going forward, that's going to be so important. I know sometimes you guys get annoyed. I talk about the draft, I talk about the future a lot, but RJ Mickens, he looks great, and when you see him talk to media and stuff, he is so humble. He's just so focused on following Derwin James's lead, and it's going really well for him. So I think there is a renewed urgency that has come back since Khalil Mack has come back from his injury. I think Khalil Mack is a clear leader of this team. I hope he doesn't retire, man. I hope he comes back next year, but who knows? So right now, his impact's being felt. My score prediction this week is going to be the Chargers win 27-17. It's a pretty decisive win. I know that the Jags are a good team. They are a playoff caliber team, and the Chargers offense didn't look great last week, but I think they can get this done. And I think they have to. And I think Jim Harbaugh-led teams tend to play their best when their best is needed. And I think Justin Herbert's clutched. So I think he wants his revenge against the Jags for that playoff game a couple years ago. But let me know what you guys think. What kind of score are we looking at here? So those are my thoughts on the game. I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts at this point on my channel in general. I've been thinking about some directions I could take it. I've been thinking about, should I be doing live streams for post games? I'm curious if that's something you guys would value. I'm looking for different ways to connect with you guys. So let me know what your thoughts are on there, and what kind of content you want from me in the future. I've talked about I'll absolutely be covering the draft in the off season. I'm locked in every Saturday watching offensive linemen, watching defensive linemen, linebackers, everything. So let me know what you guys want to see. Really appreciate you guys being here, and please subscribe if you haven't already. We're getting to my favorite time of year, man. It's getting a little colder outside. I live in Chicago. It snowed here earlier in the week. We got to see that Bears game where it was snowing on the field. I love it. I love December football, and we're getting closer and closer every day. And like I said, the Chargers play their best when their best is needed. I'm starting to really buy into this Harbaugh culture. Like I talked about in my last video, I think they have it now. I think they have it. I'm still not convinced it's their Super Bowl window or anything, but that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is on any given week, do we think they can win? And I do. So that's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for being here. Please like and subscribe if you've liked what you've seen. Let me know your score prediction in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time.